Well, I saw where you guys recently registered as a PAC with the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. So, can you tell me a little bit more about this decision?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I got reached out to by someone based out of Nashville, someone that I was able to form a great relationship with in the past, and they've always been involved in like the political sphere, right? So they reached out and said, "Hey, come join us. We're having these calls, strategy meetings on how we can create some sort of entity for representation for the Latinx community statewide, right?" So I was extremely excited for that. Not only to be considered for that, right, but to see that work being done in our communities, right, and not only here in Knoxville where I am, but in Chattanooga, in Nashville, Memphis. That was extremely exciting. So we got together, had a few strategy meetings. What is best for the community, right? That's what I really love about the PAC, right? Is that it's community based, community led. What works for the community, right? Not necessarily for the PAC itself, right? But for the people that it is that we're doing this for and alongside, right? So after a few meetings, we got to the point where it was like, hey, like I think we see the timeline ready to go. Like we can see what's ahead, what the future's looking like. And from there, we got in touch with some wonderful folks, supporters, and individuals who came along and continued to expand the PAC within that small group, right? Um, and next thing you know, we're registering, as an official PAC. We're getting our executive director, um, Sandra Sepulveda, and she's doing amazing, and then we're extremely excited for this. And our ultimate goal is to center the voices and lives of the Latinx community all across the state. And by doing so, we're hoping that it will mobilize and engage the Latinx community within the political sphere. Oftentimes, we see not only the lack of representation, but the lack of engagement for our community, right? And we want to change that. It's been time, right? But I think that now with this entity, with this PAC, we'll be able to do more amazing work and put that stepping stone there, right? Like the amplifying those voices, right?
Yeah, and my next question actually kind of leads into that. How do you guys mobilize with Latinos across the state?
Yeah, so that is the most important part, right? It's the engagement, the mobilizing, um, and we're trying to be very specific on how we do that reach, right? We don't want to make it surface level, which is what we've seen numerous times, right? From not only from uh, like these type of entities, but from the candidates themselves, right? Just to get that number in, right? To get that diversity in, right? But I think that the way that we're doing it, and we'll do it, and like we just kicked off a few weeks ago, is by doing by going into these communities, right? Going into these communities, um, and it all starts with that education aspect, right? Like, hey, here's what we have in front of us. Here are the candidates. Here are issues that it is that they're advocating for or not, right? And starting off there, right, on the education baseline, and going from there, like, hey, if we see somebody who would be a wonderful candidate, for the Latinx community, um, that's going to be one of our biggest other aspects of it, right? Like getting candidates and getting that power in the people, right? Um, but also, although it is a Latinx based and focused PAC, right? It's also an entity that serves as um, that support system for candidates, engagement, and mobilizing for all marginalized communities, right? Whether that's the Black community, right? LGBTQI plus community. We're there to not only advocate for ourselves, right, but to advocate alongside those who are in this fight together, right? So I think that that's to answer your question. I think that that's the most important part. Like not only doing it for the Latinx community, but for our entire community, and getting that engagement going on those levels.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my next question, like how to engage them in the in the political process.
Yeah.
I think you kind of answered that along with it, but if you wanted to expand on that a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give you like a more like direct answer to that, it's education, right? Involvement, whether that's, hey, here's a candidate, come support. Here are actions that we're doing alongside these candidates, or here are the actions happening in your communities that are going to impact our community at large, right? Um, and I think that that's where we're trying to lead this, to make it more of like civic engagement, but also that kind of like grassroots organizing aspect as well. We don't want to lose that sight of the community for candidates. We want to be able to find and identify candidates and individuals, right? But also to engage the community in every aspect of that advocacy, right? Whether it's educating, raising awareness, mobilizing, taking, space and actions, right? That's ultimately what I think that we're focusing on right now.
So how do you all foster community development initiatives around the around Hispanic and Latino issues? Sorry.
No, no, yeah, that's a wonderful question, right? And I think that can be answered with a very, very awesome uh, quote that goes, "Nothing about us without us," right? So it's the importance of realizing that we are the ones who have to be centered in this, right? We are the ones who um, it's our voices, right? And I think that it's important to recognize that everybody has a voice. You hear a lot of times it's like we're going to be a voice for the voiceless, right? But that's not the case, right? It's everybody has a voice, except some voices are set at a lower volumes than others. And historically, that's what we have seen in Black and brown communities, right? So I think that most importantly, we are creating that kind of that filling that space, right? Filling that space that we have seen lacking, and filling that space with individuals who are directly impacted, right? Like myself, and Sandra, the executive director, and all of those on the board, right? They are voices of those within the community to advocate for the community, right? And I think that that's um, incredibly important. Like the power in allyship is um, paramount, right? But I think that the power within ourselves, advocating for ourselves, and being that voice and being centered, is how ultimately our mission is going to be accomplished, right? By having those at the forefront who are um, directly impacted.
And how do you get people to the ballot box to go and vote?
Yeah, that's a great question. And with the advocacy that it is that we're doing, um, a lot of the demographic that we are advocating alongside are undocumented folks, right? That being said, one cannot go to the ballot box if with undocumented status, right? Um, so that can be tricky because these are individuals who make up the community, right? And without their voice, right, without their ballot, without them being in the ballot box, essentially they're being left out of the conversation, right? And that goes hand in hand with undocumented folks who cannot vote, but also with the Latinx community at large, right? It's also like, hey, like a lot of them are lacking that access to this type of engagement, right? So we essentially, our goal is to be that reach, right? To say, hey, um, this is happening. This is why it's important to be there. This is why it's important to show up, and make your voices heard, and through voting, right? And that's where I think our advocacy lies, and where the importance, a lot of it is, right? Is not only saying, hey, um, your voting is what's going to be important, but also like what's happening behind the scenes, right? I am a huge, um, advocate for the saying that's like, voting is one of many tools, right, for essentially our liberation of our communities, right? And while that is an incredibly important aspect, and an incredibly important aspect of what Fuerza Democrats is advocating for, it's also equally as important, that behind the scenes work, right? Like, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what you can do, um, if you cannot vote. Here's what you can do, to learn more about why it is that it's important for those who can vote, right?
So, what kind of startup guidance and financial support do you give to candidates?
So right now we're focusing in on, identifying these individuals within our communities, right? And it is a PAC, right? So we do have our Act Blue account going, where donations are more than welcome, and through that ultimately is how, and where that supports, financially speaking. Um, so I think to answer your question, it's a matter of us doing, what we can alongside the community to find and identify these individuals who, um, we will then be supporting, in how, whatever avenue that we can through the PAC.
So, how can others get involved with your organization?
Yeah, so that's awesome. Thank you for asking that question. I think others can get involved in numerous ways, right? Whether it's, sharing and spreading the word of Fuerza Democrats. Please follow us on all social medias. Right now, we're trying to increase that, right? We're still in our preliminary, um, phase. And so that's the most important part, right? Like, hey, here's this new entity, this new group of folks. Um, this new entity, more specifically, because the folks who are part of this are, individuals who are well known in their communities, right, and who have been doing this work for so long. um, so you can see there that, um, there is that importance in getting this new, wave of folks, engaged in this work, right, to make this work sustainable ultimately. And in doing so, it starts with, raising awareness, saying, hey, this is happening. Here's how you can support. Here's their Act Blue link, right? Or social medias, like I said. But I think right now the most important part is, support, through awareness and through, finances. Um, but also in helping us, like get that word out, the most important part, to the community that it is that we're advocating alongside.
So, how did you get involved with the organization?
I was talking to my buddy David, and he said, hey, what are you doing, like what's going on in your life right now? And I was like, oh, well, I'm about to graduate. um Law school is maybe like in my vision. He was like, oh, well, come meet us on Sunday, right? We're having this conversation, um about how to mobilize, and engage the Latinx community. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I would love to be a part of this. um, so, I hopped in, joined the call, saw a lot of familiar faces. And, from there, it was a lot of, being present, being there, actively engaged. And, I got nominated to be, part of the board, and I accepted that immediately. um, so that's how I got involved with it. Through, these relationships that I was able to foster beforehand.
That's awesome. um, Oh yeah, another question. Do you guys hold like events for any of the candidates or just events to like get out in the community?
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be another one of our big aspects, right? Education, identifying, and also mobilizing and doing this type of not only like direct action, but also like having events for the community, right? I think that that's um, one of the most important parts is actually engaging with your communities, right? Which again, like I mentioned earlier, is um, usually what lacks, right? It's you hear a lot of like the fluff, right? But you don't actually see the work um, being done, and I think that that's what a big part of our work will lie on, right? Like having fun little events here and there, whether it is to support a candidate or just to be with the community, right? And so keep an eye out on those. We are planning our calendar right now. So yes, keep an eye out on those. Help us spread the word and come hang out.